The M dash is perhaps the most mysterious punctuation mark on the SAT, but if you understand these 3 rules, you will always know when and when not to choose it as your answer. Our first rule is what I like to call the sandwich rule. And the sandwich rule is when we have non-essential information sandwiched between 2 dashes. For example, we could say something like, my brother started trying to arm wrestle everyone. This is a sentence on its own, but what if we said something like, my brother, who wasn't invited, started trying to arm wrestle everyone. Now we can see the sandwich rule in action. And you're noticing that right now I'm using 2 commas. This is because we can actually use 2 commas. We always have 3 options when we have this sort of non-essential sandwich. We have either commas, a set of parentheses, or, in this case, dashes. You are never going to have to decide between those options. There will only be one clear answer. So just remember, all 3 of those are options, but only one of them will actually exist in the answer choices. All right, so that's an example of that rule. And just to clarify, why do we know this is non-essential? Because if we remove it from the sentence, it still makes sense. That's why I started with the sentence before adding the non-essential information. All right, rule number 2 is what I like to call the Kirby Rule. Now, if you're not familiar with Kirby, Kirby is a Nintendo character that can suck up powers. Basically, it's this little pink monster and it sucks up enemies and it steals their powers. And just like Kirby, dashes suck up the power of other punctuation marks. So the Kirby Rule is when a dash is used to replace another punctuation mark. And a dash can replace quite a lot. So technically rule number 1 is this rule because it is replacing commas or parentheses. It can also replace periods, semicolons, colons, and even an ellipsis. Ellipsis being the little ... The thing to remember is dashes are extremely versatile. They can pretty much do whatever they want as long as they're replacing some sort of punctuation, which in some ways can be confusing, but in other ways can be very helpful. And this actually sort of leads to rule number 3, which is when in doubt. And my when in doubt rule is if no other answer choice works, that is to say you've actually eliminated all the other answer choices, go with the dash, because chances are it's doing something that works that perhaps you're just not as familiar with. We'll come back to this in a second, but let's go back to the Kirby Rule. The sandwich rule shows us how dashes can replace commas, but let's look at some other instances. Let's think about a period or a semicolon, which is basically separating 2 independent clauses. We could have a sentence like, I did 3 backflips wearing a blindfold. Nobody cared. So here, you could see we have 2 independent clauses. I did 3 backflips wearing a blindfold. That could be a sentence on its own. Nobody cared. That could be a sentence on its own. So we could very well have a semicolon. We could have a period. But because of that, we can also have a dash. And this is totally a stylistic choice. But again, you're never going to have to decide between a dash, a semicolon, and a period. There's going to be one clear answer. All right, what would it look like if we were doing a colon? So if you saw our colon video, you'll know that colons are really good at cliffhangers. We could set something up like, we were all shocked at what happened next. Uncle Billy jumped into the pool with all his clothes on. So this is actually an example of a cliffhanger because if we say we were all shocked at what happened next, we kind of want to know what happened next. So then we resolve the cliffhanger by talking about how Uncle Billy jumped into the pool with all his clothes on. Colon would work really well here. Because it's 2 independent clauses, semicolon could also work. A period could also work. And again, a dash could work. Another example of this that doesn't have 2 independent clauses could be something like a single word came to mind, panic. Again, we have a bit of a cliffhanger here. So we could have a colon or we could replace it with a dash. All right, one more. We'll look at a single comma being replaced by an M dash. Say, Barb There, that's a little bit better. Barb got into her car, drove to the ocean, got out, and threw her phone into the water. So why would we ever use a dash instead of a comma? Again, stylistically, you might want to do this if you are looking for a more dramatic or impactful pause. So I think throwing your phone into the water is sort of a dramatic thing to do. So for me, the dash makes sense. But again, I can't stress this enough. You'll never have to make a stylistic choice. You just need to know, is a dash capable of doing that? Yes or no? So you wouldn't have to decide between this or a comma, which would also work, or an ellipsis, right? Because we're wanting sort of a dramatic pause. And as far as when in doubt, I feel like we need to actually see some answer choices to exemplify this. So let's remember that when in doubt is sort of something we can lean back on. But the big rule we want to remember is the Kirby rule, because technically the sandwich rule is a Kirby rule. And technically the when in doubt rule should also be the Kirby rule. So this is really all we want to focus on as we work through some problems in the practice portion. I'll show you when in doubt can come in handy. All right, let's do a few practice problems here. This will give us a chance to recognize that Kirby rule where a dash is replacing some sort of punctuation, and it will also give us an opportunity to see when you don't want to choose the dash, because it sounds almost like you could just choose it every single time, but I'll show you why that's not the case. So here we have, with some 16,000 in attendance, the second world black. Okay, so I'm going to start by getting rid of this first part because we have an introductory phrase, and I like to simplify as much as possible to make things easy on myself. The second World Black and African Festival of Arts and Culture, or Festac 77, as the event was more commonly known, dash. Okay, so here, if we look at our dash option, it's pretty clear that it is creating that dash sandwich that we were talking about. So this one is definitely going to be B. And in this case, why would a comma not work? Because we talked about how you could also have a sandwich of commas, right? The only reason the comma is not going to work is because we're already ending with a dash. So even though we can use two commas, we can't mix and match. We need to either go with two commas, two dashes, or a set of parentheses, but no mixing and matching. It would be like making a sandwich, and one of your sandwich buns is like a nice sourdough bun, and then the bottom of your sandwich bun is, I don't know, a tortilla. It's not going to work out. All right, let's look at another one. In her book, The Woman Warrior. Okay, so again, I see that this is an introductory phrase. And the reason that it's easy for me to spot this is that you have a comma, and after the comma, we have our subject. So anytime you have something before the subject and then there's a comma, it means it's an introductory phrase. So we could basically start the sentence here. Author Maxine Hong Kingston examines themes of childhood, womanhood, and Chinese American identity by, and we could also sort of ignore anything after by, because more or less we know the sentence is going to end after that. All right, so author Maxine Hong Kingston examines themes of childhood, womanhood, and Chinese American identity. Whoops, I didn't mean to get rid of identity. Well, just listening to that out loud, can you tell what's going on? We don't need any punctuation. So because we don't need any punctuation, that is to say, we don't need a colon, we don't need a comma, we don't need a period or a semicolon or anything, we also don't need a dash, because the Kirby rule, remember, is when the dash is replacing a punctuation mark. So if there wasn't any punctuation needed originally, we're not going to just add it for no reason. So our answer is B. And that's a great example of when you don't want to choose the dash as your answer, if there's no need for any punctuation that the dash could replace. All right, let's check out another one here. Let's talk about how we can simplify this. If you're doing sentence boundaries, you could actually ignore everything other than the sentence that contains the underlined portion. So I'm going to start here. The arrangement of the figures, according to Swenzel, represents her idea that we all come from the earth, generation after generation. According to Swenzel. So what I'm noticing here is that we could get rid of according to Swenzel, and we could say the arrangement of the figures represents her idea that we all come from the earth, generation after generation. So we have non-essential information, which means we have a sandwich going on, right? Sandwich can certainly be done with 2 dashes, but as we just discussed, we can't mix and match. Since we already have a comma starting the sandwich, we need a comma to end the sandwich. So our answer is going to be B. So there's another example of when you don't want to go with the dash. If there's a sandwich that's already been started by a comma or ended by a comma, or in the rare case that you see parentheses, parentheses. All right, this is the last question I wanted to look at because I think in a way it sort of exemplifies rule number 3 that when in doubt, a dash is going to work. Now for this one, we actually have dashes involved in all the answers no matter what. But let's just take a look at the way the dash is being used. I'm going to start with the main sentence, defying all odds, and we're going to get rid of that introductory phrase. Rudolph didn't just walk, she ran fast. So in every single answer choice, we have she ran fast, which is kind of crazy because normally we would just write she ran fast with no punctuation whatsoever. So here it would seem like all the answers are wrong. So then like what's the point of having a dash here? Well, let's think about it. We could do something like this, right? She ran fast, or maybe even she ran fast. It adds a little bit of emphasis to the fact that she's running fast by having a longer pause. An ellipse in this case almost like slows it down before the fast, which is weird. So it would make sense that a dash would be that long dramatic pause we're looking for. So here, the stylistic choice has already been made and it exists in all of the answer choices. So just wanted to show you because this one shows just how versatile a dash can be. Now with that in mind, let's look at our options and figure out what's going on here. So A is basically saying that we have one of those sandwiches, right? So how do we test that? Between the dashes, we should have non-essential information. We were just talking about how we kind of want to emphasize the word fast, so that doesn't seem likely, but let's just see what it sounds like. If we get rid of the word fast, we have Rudolph didn't just walk, she ran during the 1960 Summer Olympics in Rome. She won both the 100. Okay, so there's an issue there. The way that I just read it, we have a comma splice. That comma right there is separating 2 independent clauses if we read it the way that A claims it's going to go. So we would get rid of A. B, we run into the same problem. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this bit here as well. She ran fast during the 19 Summer Olympics in Rome. That's, that's a weird one. Because I still feel like we have the comma splice, but then also instead of emphasizing fast, we're emphasizing fast during the 19 Summer Olympics in Rome. It doesn't roll off the tongue either. So B is not going to work again because we have a comma splice and because of the awkwardness I just mentioned. And then C, she ran fast, comma. During the 1960 Summer Olympics in Rome, she won both the 100 and 200 meter dashes and clinched first place. Okay, so here it sounds like we actually have a new sentence starting with the word during, right? So our first sentence is, she ran fast. New sentence. During the 1960 Summer Olympics in Rome, she won da 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 da. So because we have a new sentence starting with the word during, now this is a comma splice, which is no good. We need a period there or a semicolon there, which is exactly what we get with answer choice D. So D would be our answer. All said and done, the Kirby rule is the most important rule to understand because technically rule number 1 and rule number 3 should fall under that category as well. However, you're not going to be able to take advantage of understanding the Kirby rule unless you know how to use the rest of the punctuation marks on the SAT. So to get a better idea of how colons work on the SAT, go ahead and check out this video.